See if we can go ahead and wrap this up now. I know it's 17 slides, but I'm not sure how long that's going to take. So if we make it, we make it, and you guys will have a test coming up, and if you don't, we don't. So fruit is not used in biological terms like it is in the supermarket. Uh, to me, fruit suggests something that's sweet, and a vegetable is something that's savory. But vegetables and fruits can be considered to be fruits because they're reproductive structures, right? So the ripened ovary of a flower that aids in dispersal. So these are all fruits up here by that definition. These maple seeds that I mentioned in the previous video, these cockleburs, we have smaller ones on the weed seeds that stick to our socks down here in New Orleans, and then dingleberries, can't come up with these names, man. I thought that was something that stuck to your butthole after you used toilet paper. Anyway, colorful, fleshy or edible fruits are those that attract animals. So you think of fruit, that's what you're thinking of, this type of fruit. So like a fig on a tree that a bird's trying to eat poops the seeds, and a fig tree could grow later. The sepals do camouflage the fruit while they're being developed. That's good because you don't want an animal dispersing unripened fruit because the seeds haven't been fully developed. Some seeds are so tough that they pass through digestive systems, and they survive that way. And then the feces is another package. So the fruit's inside of its own moisture, and it's inside of the feces. And when that feces lands somewhere, it's another nutritional benefit for the seed to sit inside of it. And additionally, moisture finds its way to germination. And germination, the roots will find the way to the soil. And with any luck of moisture, rainfall, sunlight, the seed will grow from there. So angiosperms, as a result of making their fruit, they give us the spice of life. So all of these guys here, corn, rice, wheat, grain, that's the world's food supply. That's what we're looking to eat on any given day. We're going to have one of these servings 4 or 5 times a day. They're dried fruits of those plants, apples, cherries, oranges, and tomatoes, again, from angiosperm flowers. And even the spices that make our normal food, the meats that we use and the fruits that we eat and the vegetables make it taste even better from combinations of varying types of plant material. Pollination can come in various forms. I think one of the first things you guys think of when it comes to attracting pollinators, at least, is the color or the shape, but that wouldn't explain why some plants have successfully made their way onto Earth with less colorful or less pretty shows of fertility. Every form of plant or animal that's on this planet now is here because it's worked. So not everyone is pretty. So there's the biological cost benefit to consider. What are we going to talk about? More seeds that aren't pretty, or fewer that are really showy and really impractical in terms of development, but they actually do a great job of attracting pollinators? Do they smell nice? If you look at this structure over here in this pollination piece, this is simply about developing the greatest structure and putting that nectar where the bee wants to get to it. And as it walks through these anthers, you can see the pollen that's being distributed on its back, which let me actually go ahead and highlight this here. Over here, we're talking about the anthers, and then the carpel is going to be right here. And the porpoise of that, I'm going to go with purpose now, is as this bee walks through in this direction, pollen lands on its back and then is further distributed here. And you can actually see there's a pollen packet right in here on the back of its leg. That's it. It's going to take back to the nest for honey, but it's not doing any of this for the plant. It just happens to be that the plant and the bee have co-evolved, and the bee is a great pollinator that's set up perfectly for pollinating that plant. Now, this is where it comes to our sustainability on Earth, right? So human impact, it's simply just the 7+ billion people on the planet moving into new spaces takes away spaces for plants to live. That is then going to result in pressures placed on the plant, and those have to survive those various circumstances. Further compounding the problem is when we replant plots. We practice this idea of monoculture. very many plant individuals of the same species. So formerly in a given plot, draw a plot out here, given forest or native habitat, it could have been varying species. I'm just representing them here with color. That the animals, the plants, they all worked well together. And when we come through and plant a field of corn, or when we say that we're going to go ahead and replace the trees in our rainforest that we're cutting down, what we end up with is something more along the lines of this. Just this one homogenized group of plants. And diversity stimulates greater diversity. You know that diversity is one of the fuels for evolution in the gene pool, right? So a very critical piece of this puzzle is for us to maintain biodiversity, because that's the planet's balance. Why is that important? Let's be selfish for a second. 25% of our prescription drugs come from plants. And we've only investigated 5,000 of the 290,000 species. That should hit home. 25% of our drugs come from plants, and we've only discovered 5,000 species for medicinal use. There's another 285,000 species out there. 50,000 square miles, or about the size of Louisiana. The entirety of Louisiana are lost each year on the planet to biodiversity and native growth. The evidence can be seen if we travel to Europe, because during our massive population explosion that was centered around Europe, we carved out a bunch of trees. And North America has lost a great deal of its biodiversity, 40% in the last 2 centuries. We've made some species literally go extinct by harvesting them and not practicing sustainability. And then this piece here is about what I've pointed to here. Replanted areas have low diversity. So just over here, guys, there's just one little list. The one you'll probably recognize is morphine. But that's a list of medications that we get just from varying plants. Moving on now, we're out of plants now, we're into fungus, and our evolutionary path actually comes through here. So if I drew a quick representation of that, it's kind of our great cladogram. I want to actually delete that guy. Oop. I'm good at smartboards. Let's make one a little bit more permanent. All right. So out here is all the animals, and these are plants, but somewhere in the middle is fungi. Right? And we're actually more related, animals and fungi, because we are heterotrophs. And what that means is we have to consume calories, whereas plants are phototrophs. And they make their energy using the power of the sun, right? So this divergence there is what allowed for the animal lineage to progress. As a result of heterotrophy, we are more related to fungi. So we have to talk about them here as we're moving down this evolutionary path. So we've already covered these guys. Move on to fungi. In our next lesson, we're going to get to animals. Okay, so they have unique reproduction. No other organisms do this. We're going to talk about that later in the lesson. They do absorb nutrients just like we do, as we said. So that makes them heterotrophic. They digest their food externally. So when you see a mushroom growing on a tree, it's actually secreting enzymes that process that cellulose and the other carbohydrates in that tree material, and they consume it that way, which makes them more closely related to us, like I mentioned. And then mycorrhizae are the extended growths that grow off the fungal hyphae. Now, the fungal hyphae is what you're going to want to call a root, but it's not a root. And mycorrhiza are the projections that grow off of that, essentially just increasing surface area. We talked about surface area to volume ratio. So these are going to create more attachment points for absorption into the soil. And, you know, this is a fun one to look at too, this guy here. This one little seedling with just so many roots. in brown, and then the fungus is in white, and the mycorrhiza are the fine filaments growing off of that. So that's underneath the soil of what appears to be a pine tree. I have no confirmation of that. Okay, they are found everywhere, and I know you're thinking mushroom when you think fungus, but they come in varying forms. The that mushroom cap that you're accustomed to seeing is actually just the reproductive phase of the mushroom, right? So some fungi are bad. Think of athlete's foot. That's going to be one of those bad. I think it's called tinea. That's one of the bad ideas of fungus, is that it's just trying to survive its life, and it attacks human flesh. So these mycelia are, as listed here. I'm just going to go with this. It's mycelium, this whole piece, right? And then each of these branches that grow off of this is a hypha, right? And collectively they're referred to as hyphae in plural. So this is the, like I said, the above ground portion right here. That's what's responsible for reproducing and sending those spores out. I think you've all seen this right here, which is the fungal mycelium growing over leaves. They're just decomposing those leaves for us. For us. For Earth, I should say. Fucking this damn thing on humans. Okay. Unlike plants, the cellulose found in those walls, fungal cells are made of chitin. Why is that important? Because it's the same as in the exoskeleton of insects. So heterotrophy and now molecules, they're showing these are homologous derived characters that are found in these creatures alone, and that makes us very related to them. Okay, they grow pretty quickly. You know that overnight a fairy ring can pop up in the yard and you hadn't seen it the day before. They do grow longer without an increase in diameter, which means that if something is to grow long and skinny versus longer and fatter as it grew, the surface area is not big enough to overcome the volume on the inside. So they just stay nice and thin like this one as they grow longer. In some amazing situations, widespread fungus can add a kilometer a day. That's not linear. That's talking about adding small pieces all over the length of the central focus of the fungus. So there's this one found in Oregon that shows 22 acres. It covers 22 acres. So literally, biologists went out, sampled DNA, captured that DNA, took it back to the lab, and found that when they sampled it, it's 22 acres wide. Now, our 2,200, our Holy Cross campus is around 22 acres. I think it's 20 to 22 acres, so it's like 100 times the size of campus, right, in the ground. So that's pretty neat. It's about 2,600 years old. Now, anybody reading this slide with all this blue crap on here, it looks like hieroglyphics or something, right? Okay. So this is the weird thing. They practice both asexual stages and sexual stages. All right, so in the sexual stage, I guess it's best to go to this diagram. So as we're looking at this, let's focus over here on sexual stages. Two haploid mycelia are going to be the sexual signaling molecules, right? So in the heterokaryotic stage, which is, if you're following me, go to green here. This guy right here means it's N plus N, means there hasn't been any sharing of DNA. Once that fusion happens, you can refer to that as being sexually fused, but there was no sharing of any genetic information prior to that stage. So now we have a zygote, goes through meiosis to make spores, which are now haploid, and then from there, it can cycle back through and be N plus N again, or it can produce more N spores and reproduce its own genetic material, or travel back in this direction and combine and share. So if I delete all of this, move this guy out of the way, we'll get to that asexual stage, right? So heterokaryotic stage, they stay haploid. Hours, days, or centuries before they share. So they can grow asexually, and they can also reproduce sexually. And then over here in the asexual, we'll talk about mold, like bread mold, or yeast, which we use in bread and we're making beer. They reproduce asexually. Okay. Move on down. So this kind of puts everything on the cladogram where they're engaged with each other. We don't know all the chytrids, so we've got 3 branches up here, right? But there could be as many as 1.5 million species of fungus with only 100,000 identified. We use the sexual structures to classify them. There's a group of imperfect fungi, so there's still a great deal of uncertainty in terms of cladistics, where we name these individuals. We're just looking at these pictures over here. Again, this is not for your test, right? Because it's getting kind of tedious, but all but one group do not have flagella for reproduction. That takes us to a new stage because the other sperm did previously. Estimations 1.5 billion years ago from plants. And then fossil record, again, here we go again. Our suspicion is 1.5 billion years, but the fossil record only shows 460 because these creatures don't leave good fossils. I just had to check to see if I had the video. I thought I'd be recording myself for 15 minutes without recording. That would have been fun. Okay. So anyhow, the size of the individuals and poor fossil evidence don't give us the complete story, but this is what we're working with here. Oh. Aha. All right, so there's the chytrids. It's the only group of flagellated spores, which brings them back over to the plant relationships. So it's the earliest lineage. I need to eat. 11:59. Yeah, I'm getting hungry. All right. So lakes, ponds, and soil. Some do decomposition for us. Some are parasites. So these fungal outbreaks can kill frogs. That's a concern of ours because frogs live in our environments. They drink our water. They breathe our air. If they're getting sick, what's causing this problem? All right, and zygomycetes, these are similar to the ones that you end up finding on your fruits at home. I know it looks like brown on the surface, but like I told y'all with the sporophytes and the mosses, and I posted that video for you, if you get really close to the mold, don't breathe it in. But if you get really close to it, this is kind of what you would see growing on the mold, on the bread of the fruit around the house. We're back here again, so glomeromycetes. That's the round shape. We've got the mycorrhiza that we mentioned before. 90% of all plants have a symbiotic relationship with these guys. That's those root structures, right? So these help in plants gaining the nutrients from the soil. Really important, because without these, plants wouldn't be as successful as they are. So they evolved together. Ascomycetes, these are the ones you're going to be more familiar with right here. Mushrooms, these funguses. And then also lichens, which are the rock structures, the fungus that grows on rock. Basidiomycetes, the base, these are the ones you're going to be most familiar with. They're a little bit different than the other ones. These Mario-looking mushrooms here, which I have for you on the next slide. All right. These are the most familiar little pedestal mushrooms. And this right here is reproduction. Just this puffball, if you poke on that puffball, end up popping the spores into the environment, right? You can do a YouTube on that, just Google puffball. I usually do that in class, but it doesn't come through in the smart recorder very well. Yep. And these are just mushrooms that are, actually, I took these photos, so these are just from around the area. Parasitic fungi, this is the ones that get more concerning. 30% of fungi make their living as parasites or disease-causing agents. That's what pathogen means. So in 1926, we brought elm trees over from Europe and brought the disease with them. And then it was introduced here as an infectious disease to certain plants in our continent and our country, and it caused a big loss in the tree populations that are here and the other plants that it affects because there was no native competition to it. So fungi, we have to worry about it. one of the things, you guys, you talk about fertilizer in plants or grasses and so forth. Over fertilization, too much moisture, not enough sunlight, fungi will thrive in those environments, and it can really dispose of a crop pretty quickly. Like, for instance, this is called corn smut, and that's a fungus that grows in corn. If it's in small quantities, you can't see it, but then it gets consumed, and it causes some pretty significant issues for people. One of the problems with growing crops is that the corn in the field or any other type of crop that we grow here in the United States, they're genetically identical, which means that this disease, here we go talking about fungi jumping from one individual to the next. Well, corn can't socially distance themselves, so we end up finding that the disease can jump from one individual to the other one. So the majority of plant diseases that farmers have to deal with are the result of a fungal infection. And then here it is in humans. Ringworm is a fungus, and so an athlete's foot. We call that mycosis, general term for fungal infection. And then we get on into lichens, right? Millions of green algae. Remember, algae are not plants. We go all the way up here. Algae, right over here. They just do photosynthesis, but they don't fit the description of what a plant is. Lichens are algae combined with cyanobacteria and a fungal hyphae. So this image over here gives us the idea that the fungus is growing around the algal cell. They're working together, and in many cases, they've been named together as a species because they're only found together. And then lichens are pretty tough little cookies. These growths over here. That's those are lichens growing on rocks. This is the material that actually is responsible for causing rock erosion, coupled with sun, wind, rain, freezing, varying temperatures. But lichens that grow into the rock crevices are the ones that create the first layers of dust that'll eventually morph geologically into soil over decomposition of those rocks, and lichens are aiding in that by the constant pressure they place upon the rocks. Yep, and then they're sensitive to air pollution. So that's critical to us too, because they're not doing well when the air is polluted, so where you're not going to find these. Yep, you're not going to find them where there's air pollution. Fungi are mutualists. So if you remember your types of symbiosis, a mutualist is an individual that is going to work in a close relationship with another individual, and they're both going to receive a benefit. So parasitism, one benefits, one is harmed and one benefits. In commensalism, one individual is going to benefit and one is not going to be affected. And in mutualism, they're both affected positively. So this is the neat thing. The leafcutter ants, I know you know that part of the story, but did you know that when leaves are then brought down into the core of the nest, it's the fungi that actually do the work of decomposing the leaves, because plants can't do anything. The ants can't do anything to eat the plants. They're carnivorous, but they can eat the fungus and get nutrients from the fungus. Go ahead and try to find a YouTube on leafcutter ants, and then you'll see some cameras going down to the nest and how those fungi actually work for those leaves. And then finally, I know I went a little bit overboard, but I knew I could finish. The practicality of fungi. So just like plants and fruits and seasoning and all those things, very practical. Fungi go beyond. I know we're looking at the picture for cheese now, but one of the issues, a lot of the shipments that we used to send over in World War II to the European theater were getting wet. So organic products like the canvas that we were using and wood and cotton, it was getting consumed by various types of aggressive fungi, which is when we came out with polyvinyl chloride and plastics and some synthetic materials for socks and so forth. We found out that DDT and other environmental concerns can be consumed, so they're really good at helping with oil spills. And then we get to use fungi to help us with production of cheese and beer. And then this penicillium is the result of a fungal growth, and it was actually an accidental discovery, as you know. And in this region here, you can see that staph bacteria won't grow next to penicillium. And we use that to make, as you know, penicillin. Okay? And then finally, we use some fungi to actually that's not good. To decompose some plants, and in this case, turn into ethanol. All right? I gotta shut the video down because it's getting long on us, but important to remember that as you come to the end of this, your study guide needs to be finished and you're preparing for a test, which I will upload and discuss with you via email. Talk to you later.